Okay, so part two of the lecture on Congress, we're going to start with the committee systems. And this is really where the work is done. And there are different types of committees within the legislature, the federal legislature. There are standing committees, and these are the permanent committees that remain in existence from one session to another, regardless of which political party controls that chamber. And they are the most important committees because they are the ones that write and they propose and write legislation. Each committee covers a particular subject area, like the Agricultural Committee or the Healthcare Committee, etc. But the most important committee is the House Ways and Means Committee in the House of Representatives and the Senate Finance Committee in the Senate, because both of these have jurisdiction over taxes, trade, and entitlement programs, which are some very important roles of the federal government. The Senate and House Appropriations Committee is also a powerful committee because they determine funding for various programs. And all standing committees, except for the House Rules Committee, receive bills and formulate them into legislation. So if there is a bill that is introduced into the House of Representatives over agriculture, it will be assigned most likely to the Agricultural Committee, who will then shape it into a piece of legislation that will eventually go to the entire House floor for a vote, unless it is killed in committee, which oftentimes happens. Then there are select committees. These are temporary, and they do not have the power to present legislation to the full Congress. These are set up to address a specific issue or to highlight a specific event. And select committees, some examples of those are the Senate Watergate Committee from 1973 and the House Select Committee on Benghazi that was formulated in 2012. And so they had a specific role that they were trying to perform, addressing an issue or highlighting or an issue or investigating an issue. The third type of committee is the Joint Committee, and this is formed with members from both the House and the Senate, and there are four such committees. Okay, these are committees. There are four joint committees on economics, taxation, Library of Congress, and printing. They're permanent, but they do not have the power to report legislation. And then you have conference committees, and these are temporary joint committees that are created to work out differences in similar bills so that it can be sent to the president for signature to become a law. And so when the House and the Senate pass a different version of the same bill, they have to hammer out the details to make them identical before sending them to the president for his signature or veto. So a bill has to pass the House and the Senate in exact form, and so if they pass something similar but it's not the exact form, conference committees are created. And so conference committees are temporary, and they are meant to focus on a specific bill that is trying to be worked out according to the House and the Senate. Within each committee, there is a hierarchy that is based on seniority. For the most part, there are some exceptions to this rule, but this means that the rank is given to an individual on the basis of length of continuous service on a committee. Not in Congress itself, but on a committee. So it's usually going to be chaired by the most senior member of the ruling party. So whatever political party has the majority in the House, then all the committees in the House are going to be chaired by the most senior member on that committee in the Democratic Party. And then typically you have what is known as a ranking member, who is the most senior member of the minority party. Now, seniority rules are not hard and fast, and they have been skirted, notably in 1995 by Speaker Newt Gingrich, who violated the tradition of seniority on committee chairmanships and appointed committee chairmen based upon loyalty to him and his party rather than based on seniority. Democrats, by and large, have gone back to utilizing seniority, but have altered the practices so that freshmen have the opportunity to get on committees to increase the possibility for their reelection. If committees are where the real work gets done, the staff are going to be the members who actually do the work. And congressmen and women and senators employ a very large number of staff, 11,500 total for Washington and home offices. Now, there are 535 members of Congress, and so the 11,500 is going to be divided up amongst those individuals. And so they actually, based upon comparisons to other democracies, employ a huge, vast number of staff members in America versus other places around the world. There's also committee staff, and these are, there's about 2,000 committee staff members, and they are attached to a particular committee regardless of political party in power. So if there is a standing committee in the House or in the Senate, it comes with a staff whose job it is, if it's a transportation committee, whose job it is to help run the transportation committee and formulate legislation and take part in those hearings, etc. And so staff plays a huge role in the Congress. Now, how a bill becomes a law. Okay. This is a very large piece of the puzzle here for this particular institution, and we can quickly watch this little Schoolhouse Rock video just for funsies.
Woo, you sure gotta climb a lot of steps to get to this Capitol building here in Washington. Well, I wonder who that sad little scrap of paper is.
I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Well, it's a long, long journey to the capital city. It's a long, long wait while I'm sitting in committee, but I know I'll be a law someday. At least I hope and pray that I will, but today I am still just a bill.
Gee, Bill, you certainly have a lot of patience and courage.
Well, I got this far. When I started, I wasn't even a bill. I was just an idea. Some folks back home decided they wanted a law passed, so they called their local congressman, and he said, "You're right, there ought to be a law." Then he sat down and wrote me out and introduced me to Congress, and I became a bill. And I'll remain a bill until they decide to make me a law. I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill, and I got as far as Capitol Hill. Well, now I'm stuck in committee, and I'll sit here and wait while a few key congressmen discuss and debate whether they should let me be a law. I hope and pray that they will, but today I'm still just a bill.
Listen to those congressmen arguing. Is all that discussion and debate about you?
Yeah, I'm one of the lucky ones. Most bills never even get this far. I hope they decide to report on me favorably, otherwise I may die.
Die?
Yeah, die in committee. Oh, but it looks like I'm going to live. Now I go to the House of Representatives and they vote on me.
If they vote yes, what happens?
Then I go to the Senate and the whole thing starts all over again.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes. I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. And if they vote for me on Capitol Hill, well, then I'm off to the White House where I'll wait in a line with a lot of other bills for the president to sign. And if he signs me, then I'll be a law. How I hope and pray that he will. But today I am still just a bill.
You mean even if the whole Congress says you should be a law, the president can still say no?
Yes, that's called a veto. If the president vetoes me, I have to go back to Congress and they vote on me again, and by that time you're so
By that time, it's very unlikely that you become a law. It's not easy to become a law, is it?
No, but how I hope and pray that I will. But today I am still just a bill.
He signed your bill. Now you're a law.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so nope, we're not going to replay it. So just a little Schoolhouse Rock for you to kind of boil down the process. How a bill becomes a law. Let's talk about it in more academic terms. Okay, so the president or an agency can craft a piece of legislation, but it is not a bill until it is sponsored and introduced in a chamber by a senator or a representative. So only a senator or a representative can actually introduce a bill into Congress. And so it becomes a bill and is referred to a committee for deliberation. And as we discussed, there are specific committees for different subjects, and no floor action on a bill can be taken until a committee has taken it up and deliberated. So committees can deliberate for as long as they need, and so this can sometimes spell disaster for a particular piece of legislation. It can also be referred to a subcommittee beneath the overall committee, and so it can be sort of trapped in these rings of hell of committees that occur in the legislature. But if a committee likes it, they typically vote it out of committee, and they vote it on to the whole chamber. Now, committees are wonderful ways to kill bills, and in fact, between 80 and 90% of bills that are introduced into the House of Representatives, which is around 10,000 in total, are killed in committee. And so a very small percentage are actually going to be voted out of committee for the entire chamber to take a vote on. But once it is voted out of committee, then debate is set up. And debate looks a little bit different depending on the chamber that you are in. In the House of Representatives, debate is very, very restricted. All time allotted to debate the bill is controlled by the bill's sponsor and the leading opponent, and so they will allocate time to those who agree to either speak for or against the bill. And so the time that you get is very, very limited. Because there's 435 members, and if they debated constantly on different pieces of legislation, then nothing would ever get done, less than what actually gets done currently. And so in the House, things are much, much more structured. But in the Senate, things are less structured, and there's unlimited debate on a topic or a bill. And so once a senator has the floor, they may speak as long as they wish. And historically, this has been utilized to force individuals into changing an unsavory bill. And this is called a filibuster. And a filibuster is where members of the Senate prevent action on legislation they oppose by continuously talking and holding the floor until the majority backs down, agrees to alter the bill, or invokes cloture. And when you filibuster a bill, you actually don't even have to talk about the bill. You just maintain the Senate floor and you talk about whatever. And you do this until the majority decides to change it, or they invoke what is known as called cloture. And cloture is a procedure to end a filibuster. It's a vote of 3/5 of the chamber, which is 60 votes. And if they invoke cloture, it means that they vote to end debate. And that is how they can essentially shut up a filibuster. But this has been really diluted over the recent history, because in 2013, out of frustration, the Senate Democrats, who had the majority at the time under the leadership of Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, altered the rules to create what is known as the nuclear option. And this nuclear option is using only a majority vote to invoke cloture. So no longer did they need 3/5 of the chamber, which is 60 votes, and a very hard vote to get. They only needed 50 plus 1, which is much easier to get. And so this nuclear option was put into place, and it was lamented by the Republicans, but then when the Republicans took over as the majority, they kept the nuclear options, and so there is some debate as to whether or not it's a good idea or if it's harming the institution of the Senate, and whatever the case. But just a little bit of trivia here. The longest filibuster in American history was 24 hours and 18 minutes, and it was delivered by Strom Thurmond, who was a senator from South Carolina in 1957, and he was actually filibustering the Civil Rights Act of 1957. So debate can take a very long time in the Senate, but once debate is concluded, then a vote is going to be held. And leaders will schedule a vote in each chamber. Rarely will a leader bring a bill to a vote if they don't already have the number of votes to pass it. And so this is where the whips come into play. They generally utilize the whips in this regard to, quote, whip up the vote and to secure enough votes for the bill to pass. And so once a vote is taken and it is maybe passed by both houses, then it's sent to a conference committee. And members from each chamber, usually individuals who are senior members of the committee the bill originated in, come together to iron out the differences between the Senate and the House versions of the bill. When the issues are worked out, then it's going to be sent back to each chamber for final passage before it is sent to the president. And so it is going to be sent on to the President of the United States. And the President has a couple of different options to him. He can sign the bill, and then it will become law, so he can put his signature on it. Or he can veto the bill, which is a refusal to sign it into law. And within 10 days, if he hasn't signed it within 10 days, then it will be sent back to the chamber that the bill originated from. Okay? Excuse me. He has to. Let me back up on that. If I'm getting veto and pocket veto confused. So he has 10 days to sign it or to veto it. And if he vetoes it, then it will be sent back to the chamber that it originated from. And then Congress can choose to override the veto with a 2/3 majority vote in each chamber. But this does not happen very often. Now, we get onto this pocket veto. And a pocket veto means that he neither signs it nor vetoes it. He just sort of ignores it. And when he does this, if Congress adjourns in that 10-day period, then the president does not sign the bill, it dies. It doesn't become law or anything like that. But if Congress is still in session, then it will if Congress is not in session, then it cannot be overridden. So that pocket veto is a way for him to just sort of ignore it and to let it sort of play out. He neither has to take any hits for signing it or for vetoing it. So he has that pocket veto sort of at his discretion as a way to sort of help himself. Now, we're going to move on to how Congress decides on votes. There are a number of things that will affect how they vote. And the first thing are going to be constituents. And because of the want for re-election, politicians are going to pay attention to their constituents, what their constituents want. However, the caveat here is that constituents actually rarely pay attention to what policies and politics that their representative supports, unless it is a big media circus surrounding their policies or their politics. We don't even really know what they're doing very often. We don't have time to pay as much attention as we might should. And so while they have to sort of play to their constituents, they can sort of spin what they're doing in a certain light to convince their constituents, who are not going to really dig very deep into the issue, to convince their constituents that they're actually doing, what the constituents want them to do. So they will play to their constituents, but they will also put a political spin on what they're doing, so that constituents think that they're up there doing what they voted for them to do. And then interest groups will play a role. And interest groups are defined as a group of people who align based upon a shared interest, who worked to protect that interest. And so interest groups can mobilize voters, they serve as watchdogs, they supply candidates with money, and they influence legislation. And so this will play a huge role in what Congress does, what they decide, who votes for what particular bill, because they don't want to tick off any interest groups who might be able to mobilize against them. And then party leadership. And party leadership is, you've got to pay attention to what your leaders want you to do. And party unity votes are typically things that the entire party is going to vote for. So one political party votes one way and the opposing party votes another. And so you sort of have to pay attention to your leadership and sort of step in line with what it is they want you to do. And so if not, then that leader can sort of mobilize his leadership political action committee to run a candidate against you if you are not falling in line with what the political party and the legislative agenda is. You can also be rewarded or punished based on committee assignments. So if you're not doing what you're supposed to do, then you can probably be stripped of a committee assignment, or you can receive really good committee assignments if you're a loyal party person. Access to the floor. This is your ability to actually get floor time to speak in favor or against a certain bill. It allows you to get notoriety in the House of Representatives and allows you to sort of prove to your constituents back home that you are doing legislative stuff and you are taking care of business. And because this is time that is allocated by party leaders, most members really attempt to stay on their party leadership's good side so that they are not punished by not having access to the floor. And the whip system can be employed against you. And the whip is supposed to communicate the leader's wishes and expectations, and it is their job to gin up support for a legislative agenda of the party. There's this idea of log rolling, and this is defined as agreements made between legislatures in exchange for support of another bill later. So essentially, I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine. I'll support Bill X if you'll support Bill Y. And so this can play a huge role in what you decide you will vote on and support. And then the presidency. While the president doesn't have the ability to instruct people how to vote, he can lean on people and pressure them to vote one way or another. And so if you get a call from the president, sometimes that will, create some situation where you're starstruck and you'll vote for whatever it is the party is wanting you to vote for. Partisanship, congressional polarization is going to play a huge role in how Congress decides. Sometimes people are just against something because the other party is for it, and vice versa. And so partisanship will play a role in how Congress decides. You're supposed to be against it, so you're against it. Now, the Congress does have some extra legislative duties. Implementation of the laws. Senate has the authority to advise and consent to the president's nominations. And so if the president nominates somebody to a cabinet position or to a federal judge to the bench, then it is the Senate that will advise and consent to that. They will take a vote as to whether or not that nomination can actually happen. And then impeachment. They have this executive oversight because they have the power of impeachment against the president. And they can, in the House of Representatives, it's a two-step process. In the House of Representatives, they can draw the president up on charges of impeachment, and then the Senate, when this happens, the Senate will have to take those charges up and try the president in a trial, and then after both of those things occur, then he's removed from office. But impeachment is not really removal of office. Impeachment simply means that you have been convicted of the charges. You have been drawn up on charges by the House of Representatives. And we have actually had two presidents in American history who have been impeached. Andrew Johnson, who was the 17th president, and then President Bill Clinton. They both were impeached, but they were never convicted by the Senate, and so they were actually never removed from office. And so it is a two-step process, and removal of office and impeachment are not going to be the same thing. All right, so we're going to leave off here, and we're going to move into the second lecture, which is going to deal with the executive branch of government. So I'll see you then.